Hazel Thornton gripped the edge of the windowsill, staring out at the dusty main street of Willow Creek. The year was 1875, and at 20 years old, she felt like her life was ending before it had even begun. Her mother's words still rang in her ears like the town church bell. "You will marry Joseph Blackwood, and that is final." The weight of those words pressed down on her chest, making it difficult to breathe in the already stifling summer heat of the Wyoming Territory. Joseph Blackwood was twice her age, a wealthy banker whose wife had died the previous winter. He had 3 children already and needed a mother for them, or so her own mother kept reminding her. "Hazel," her mother's sharp voice cut through her thoughts. "Stop daydreaming and help me with these dishes. The Blackwoods will be here for dinner tonight, and everything must be perfect." "Yes, Mother," Hazel replied, turning from the window. She tucked a strand of her auburn hair behind her ear and reached for a cloth to dry the dishes her mother had washed. "I don't understand why you're being so difficult about this," Margaret Thornton said, scrubbing at a pot with more force than necessary. "Most girls would be thrilled to marry a man of Mr. Blackwood's standing. He's respected throughout the territory, and he can provide for you in ways your father and I never could." Hazel bit her tongue to keep from saying what she truly felt, that Joseph Blackwood's eyes were cold when he looked at her, that his hands felt like sandpaper when they brushed against hers, and that the thought of being his wife made her stomach twist into painful knots. "I just don't love him, Mother," she said quietly. Margaret sighed heavily. "Love has nothing to do with it, Hazel. Your father and I married because it was sensible and love grew over time. That's how these things work." Hazel knew better than to argue. Her parents' marriage had been arranged by their families back east before they'd moved west. They'd built a life together, had her and her 2 brothers, but Hazel had never seen a spark between them, never witnessed a tender touch or a loving glance. She wanted more than that. She wanted what she read about in the few novels she'd managed to get her hands on: passion, adventure, a man who saw her as more than just a convenient solution to his problems. "Go change into your blue dress," her mother instructed. "The one with the lace collar, and do something with your hair. It looks like you've been caught in a windstorm." Hazel nodded and left the kitchen, her steps heavy as she climbed the narrow staircase to her bedroom. The blue dress hung on the back of her door, mocking her with its finery. It was the nicest dress she owned, purchased specifically for occasions with the Blackwoods. As she changed and arranged her hair into a neat bun at the nape of her neck, Hazel caught sight of her reflection in the small mirror above her dresser. Her green eyes, usually bright and curious, looked dull today, resigned. Was this really to be her fate? Married to a man she didn't love, raising children not her own, living in a house that would never feel like home. The sound of horses outside drew her attention to the window. A small group of cowboys was riding into town, likely coming from one of the ranches outside Willow Creek. They were laughing and joking with one another, dust rising from their horses' hooves. Freedom, Hazel thought with a pang of envy. One of the riders, tall and broad-shouldered, caught her eye. He rode slightly apart from the others, his posture straight and confident in the saddle. As if sensing her gaze, he looked up toward her window. Even from this distance, Hazel could see that he was handsome, with a strong jaw shadowed by stubble and a hat pulled low over his eyes. He tipped his hat to her in a casual greeting before continuing on his way. Hazel's heart fluttered in her chest, a small rebellion against the fate that awaited her downstairs. She didn't know who the cowboy was, but for a brief moment he had really seen her and acknowledged her existence with that simple gesture. "Hazel," her mother called from downstairs. "They're almost here." With one last glance at the now empty street, Hazel turned away from the window and headed downstairs to meet her future husband. The Blackwoods arrived promptly at 6 o'clock. Joseph, dressed in a fine suit that emphasized his portly figure, led his 3 children into the Thornton home like a general leading troops into battle. His eldest, a girl of 12 named Martha, glowered at Hazel from beneath her bonnet. The 2 boys, James and William, aged 10 and 8, showed more interest in the cookies Hazel's mother had set out than in their potential new stepmother. "Miss Thornton," Joseph said, taking Hazel's hand and pressing his lips to it in a gesture that felt more possessive than respectful. "You look lovely this evening." "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood," Hazel replied, resisting the urge to wipe her hand on her skirt when he released it. Dinner was a stilted affair, with Hazel's father and Joseph discussing business and politics while her mother fussed over the children. Hazel sat quietly, answering when spoken to, but otherwise lost in her own thoughts. "I've purchased a new pianoforte for the house," Joseph said suddenly, addressing Hazel directly. "Martha has been taking lessons, but I thought perhaps you might play for us sometimes as well." "Do you play, Miss Thornton?" "A little," Hazel admitted, "though I fear I'm not very accomplished." "No matter," Joseph said with a dismissive wave of his hand. "You'll have plenty of time to practice once we're married." "Once we're married." The words fell like stones into the pit of Hazel's stomach. The inevitability of it all threatened to suffocate her. "Speaking of which," Joseph continued, turning to Hazel's father, "I was thinking we might set the date for 2 weeks from Sunday." "No sense in a long engagement, and the children need stability." Hazel's father nodded in agreement. 2 weeks sounds reasonable. Margaret can help with the preparations." 2 weeks. Hazel couldn't stop herself from blurting out, "But that's so soon." Her mother shot her a warning look. "It's plenty of time, Hazel. We don't need anything elaborate." "I quite agree," Joseph said. "A simple ceremony at the church, followed by a small reception at my home. The children can get used to having you there right away." Hazel looked down at her plate, her appetite completely gone. 2 weeks. In 2 weeks, she would be Mrs. Joseph Blackwood, stepmother to 3 children who clearly resented her presence, wife to a man who saw her as little more than a convenience. After dinner, while her parents entertained Joseph in the parlor, Hazel was tasked with helping the children with a puzzle in the dining room. Martha refused to acknowledge her, focusing intently on the puzzle pieces before her. The boys were more receptive, but their interest was clearly more in the puzzle than in her. "You like living in Willow Creek?" Hazel asked, attempting to connect with them. "It's fine," James said with a shrug. "Papa says you'll make us eat vegetables every day," William said, eyeing her suspiciously. Hazel began, but Martha cut her off. "We don't need you," the girl said coldly. "Papa only wants you because he needs someone to cook and clean and watch us." "Our mama would still be here if she hadn't gotten sick." "Martha," James hissed, "Papa said to be nice." "I don't care what Papa said," Martha replied, standing up abruptly. "She's not our mama, and she never will be." With that, Martha stormed out of the dining room, leaving Hazel with the 2 boys, who looked uncomfortable but continued working on the puzzle. Hazel's heart ached for the children. They had lost their mother, and now their father was bringing a stranger into their home. She couldn't blame Martha for her hostility. But at the same time, Hazel felt trapped in a situation not of her own making, expected to mother children who didn't want her, to be a wife to a man she didn't love. Later that night, after the Blackwoods had left and her parents had gone to bed, Hazel sat by her window, staring up at the stars. The moon cast a silver glow over the sleeping town, and in the distance, she could hear the faint sounds of music and laughter from the saloon at the edge of town. Freedom seemed so close and yet so far away. If she were a man, she could saddle a horse and ride away, find work on a ranch or in another town. But as a woman, her options were limited. Marriage was expected, necessary even for survival in this harsh territory. As she contemplated her bleak future, movement on the street below caught her eye. The cowboy she had seen earlier was walking alone, his spurs jingling softly with each step. He paused beneath the oak tree across from her house, leaning against it to roll a cigarette. In the moonlight, she could see him more clearly. He was younger than she had initially thought, perhaps in his mid-20s, with a strong profile and capable hands that moved with practiced ease as he rolled his cigarette. There was something compelling about him, a quiet confidence that drew her eye. As if sensing her gaze again, he looked up. Their eyes met across the distance, and Hazel felt a jolt of recognition, though she was certain they had never spoken. The cowboy smiled, a slow, easy smile that reached his eyes, and tipped his hat to her once more before striking a match against the tree trunk and lighting his cigarette. Hazel found herself smiling back before she remembered herself and stepped away from the window. She shouldn't be exchanging smiles with strange men in the middle of the night, especially not when she was all but engaged to Joseph Blackwood. But as she prepared for bed, she couldn't help but wonder who the cowboy was, and why the simple act of him acknowledging her existence had made her feel more alive than anything had in years. The next morning, Hazel convinced her mother that they needed fresh eggs from the general store. It was a flimsy excuse, they had plenty of eggs, but Hazel desperately needed to escape the house and the constant talk of wedding preparations. "Very well," Margaret said with a sigh. "But be quick about it. We need to start planning the menu for the reception." Hazel practically fled the house, grateful for the momentary reprieve. The morning air was crisp and clean, the sun not yet high enough to bake the dusty streets. Willow Creek was beginning to stir, with shopkeepers opening their doors and workers heading to their jobs. At the general store, Hazel took her time selecting eggs, savoring these few moments of freedom. As she was paying, the bell above the door jingled and a group of cowboys entered, their boots thudding heavily on the wooden floor. "Zachary, Mr. Peterson," the store owner, greeted one of them warmly. "Didn't expect to see you boys in town today. Thought you'd be busy with the roundup at the Triple R." "Boss sent us for supplies," the cowboy replied, and Hazel recognized his voice even before she turned to look at him. It was the cowboy from the previous night, the one who had tipped his hat to her. Up close, he was even more handsome than she had thought. Tall and lean, with broad shoulders and sun-bronzed skin, he had the look of a man who spent most of his life outdoors. His eyes were a startling blue, bright against his tanned face, and his sandy brown hair curled slightly where it emerged from beneath his hat. "Miss," he said, noticing her and tipping his hat. "Zachary Reeves at your service." "Hazel Thornton," she replied, feeling a flush rise to her cheeks under his direct gaze. "Miss Thornton," he said, her name sounding different somehow when he said it. "I believe I saw you at the window yesterday." "Yes," Hazel admitted, clutching her basket of eggs a bit tighter. I saw you ride into town." Mr. Peterson cleared his throat pointedly. "Miss Thornton is engaged to Joseph Blackwood," he said, a note of warning in his voice. "The wedding's in 2 weeks." Zachary's smile faltered slightly, but he recovered quickly. "Is that so? Congratulations, Miss Thornton." "Thank you," Hazel said automatically, though the words felt hollow. "Well, I won't keep you from your errands," Zachary said, stepping back. "It was a pleasure to meet you officially." "Likewise, Mr. Reeves," Hazel replied, and she meant it. As she left the store, she could feel his eyes on her, and for some reason it made her stand a little straighter, walk a little more confidently. It was silly, she knew. She was all but married to another man, and this cowboy was nothing to her, a stranger she had exchanged perhaps a dozen words with. But as she walked home, eggs forgotten in her basket. She couldn't help but think about Zachary Reeves and the way he had looked at her not as a solution to a problem or as a future wife and mother, but simply as a woman worthy of notice. The following days passed in a blur of wedding preparations. Hazel's mother took her to the dressmaker for fittings, insisted she practice her housekeeping skills, and drilled her on the proper way to address Joseph's business associates. Through it all, Hazel felt like a spectator in her own life, watching as decisions were made for her with little regard for her own feelings. "You'll learn to love him," her mother insisted one evening as they sat mending Joseph's children's clothes, another practice session for Hazel's future role. "Joseph is a good man, stable and respectable." "I know, Mother," Hazel said, though she wasn't at all sure that she would ever love Joseph Blackwood. How could she love a man who had never once asked her what she wanted, who had decided she would be his wife with the same calculating precision he probably used when acquiring a new property? On Sunday, 5 days after her brief encounter with Zachary Reeves, Hazel sat in church beside her parents, half listening to the preacher's sermon. Joseph sat on her other side, his thigh pressed uncomfortably against hers despite the ample space on the pew. His children sat beside him, Martha still glaring, the boys fidgeting restlessly. As the congregation rose to sing a hymn, Hazel's gaze drifted across the church and landed on a familiar figure standing near the back. Zachary Reeves, cleaned up and dressed in his Sunday best, was watching her. When their eyes met, he didn't look away. Instead, he offered a small, almost sad smile before joining in the hymn. His voice carried across the church, deep and rich, and Hazel found herself straining to hear it above the others. There was something about him that drew her, something that made her heart beat a little faster whenever their eyes met. After the service, as everyone filed out of the church, Hazel found herself face to face with Zachary on the steps. "Miss Thornton," he said, tipping his hat. "You look lovely today." "Thank you, Mr. Reeves," she replied, acutely aware of Joseph's presence behind her. "Hazel," Joseph said, his hand coming to rest possessively on her lower back. "Who is your friend?" "This is Mr. Zachary Reeves," Hazel said, stepping subtly away from Joseph's touch. "Mr. Reeves, this is Mr. Joseph Blackwood." The two men sized each other up, an unspoken tension crackling between them. "Reeves," Joseph said finally, nodding curtly. "You work for Roger Randall at the Triple R, don't you?" "Yes, sir," Zachary replied. "Been there about 3 years now." "Roger's a good man," Joseph said, though his tone suggested he didn't extend the same courtesy to Zachary. "Keeps his hands in his own business, which is more than I can say for some of his employees." Zachary's jaw tightened, but his voice remained even. "Mr. Randall values loyalty and hard work, which is why I've stayed with him." "Indeed," Joseph said dismissively. "Come along, Hazel. We're having dinner with your parents to discuss the final arrangements for the wedding." Hazel hesitated, not wanting to leave just yet. "It was nice to see you again, Mr. Reeves," she said, hoping he could hear the sincerity in her voice. "You as well, Miss Thornton," Zachary replied, his eyes holding hers for a moment longer than was strictly proper. "I wish you all the happiness in the world." As Joseph led her away, Hazel couldn't help but glance back over her shoulder. Zachary was still standing there, watching her go, and the look in his eyes made her heart ache with a longing she couldn't quite name. That night, unable to sleep, Hazel sat by her window again. The street below was quiet, most of the town having retired for the night. But as the clock in the town square struck midnight, she saw a now familiar figure walking down the street. Zachary paused beneath the oak tree again, but this time, instead of rolling a cigarette, he seemed to be waiting for something or someone. After a moment, he looked up at her window, and Hazel knew with sudden certainty that he was waiting for her. She should close the curtains and go to bed. She should forget about Zachary Reeves and focus on her future with Joseph Blackwood. That was what a proper young woman would do. Instead, Hazel found herself putting on her shawl and quietly making her way downstairs, careful not to wake her parents. The front door creaked slightly as she opened it, but no one stirred within the house. Outside, the night air was cool against her skin. Hazel hesitated on the porch, suddenly aware of the impropriety of what she was doing. Meeting a man in the middle of the night, less than 2 weeks before her wedding to another. It was scandalous, potentially ruinous, but something compelled her forward, across the street to where Zachary waited beneath the oak tree. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he said softly as she approached. "I shouldn't have," Hazel admitted. "This is inappropriate." "I know," Zachary said, "and I wouldn't normally ask a respectable woman to meet me like this, but I couldn't stop thinking about you, and I needed to speak with you away from prying eyes and listening ears." "What did you want to say?" Hazel asked, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and excitement. Zachary took a deep breath. "I know we barely know each other," he began, "and I know you're engaged to Blackwood, but something tells me you're not marrying him by choice." Hazel should have been offended by his presumption, but the truth of his words struck a chord within her. "It's complicated," she said finally. "It always is," Zachary agreed. "But I've seen the way he looks at you like you're a prize he's won, not a woman he loves. And I've seen the way you look when you're with him like a bird in a cage, beautiful but trapped." Tears sprang to Hazel's eyes at his perception. No one had ever seen her so clearly before, had ever understood the turmoil within her. "My mother says I'll learn to love him," she whispered. "That love grows over time." "Sometimes it does," Zachary acknowledged, "but sometimes it's there from the beginning, a spark that ignites the moment two people meet." He took a step closer to her, close enough that she could see the moonlight reflected in his eyes. "Did you feel that spark with Blackwood, Hazel?" The use of her first name, so intimate in the quiet night, sent a shiver down her spine. "No," she admitted. "I didn't." "And do you feel it now?" Zachary asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Hazel couldn't lie, not to him and not to herself. "Yes," she said simply. Zachary reached out slowly, giving her time to step away if she wanted to, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His touch was gentle, reverent, so different from Joseph's possessive grip. "I'm not a wealthy man," he said. "I can't offer you the kind of life Blackwood can, but I can promise to respect you, to listen to you, to treat you as a partner, not a possession." "Zachary," Hazel began, but he shook his head. "I'm not asking you to run away with me tonight," he clarified. "I just wanted you to know that you have a choice, that if you don't want to marry Blackwood, you don't have to." "My parents have already arranged everything," Hazel said, the reality of her situation crashing back down upon her. "The invitations have been sent, the dress is being made. Everyone in town knows about the wedding." "And what about what you want?" Zachary asked. "Does that count for nothing?" Hazel had never really considered that her wants might matter in this situation. From the moment Joseph had expressed interest in her, it had been assumed that she would marry him. Her mother had told her it was final, and she had accepted it as her fate. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I don't know if I have the courage to defy my parents, to face the gossip and scandal that would follow if I called off the wedding." Zachary nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Think about it," he said. "That's all I ask. Think about what you truly want, and know that whatever you decide, I'll respect your choice." He stepped back, creating distance between them once more. "I'll be at the Triple R for the next few days helping with the roundup, but I'll be back in town on Friday. If you want to talk more, I'll be at the Silverton Hotel in the evening." "I don't know if I can get away," Hazel said, already calculating the excuses she might need to make. Like I said, it's your choice, Zachary replied. I won't pressure you, but I'll be there just in case. He tipped his hat to her one last time before turning to walk away. Hazel watched him go, her mind a whirlwind of conflicting emotions and thoughts. As she crept back into her house and up to her room, she couldn't help but compare the brief time she had spent with Zachary to the hours she had endured with Joseph. With Joseph, she felt stifled, diminished, like a bird in a cage, as Zachary had so aptly put it. But with Zachary, even in those few stolen moments, she had felt alive, seen, valued for who she was rather than what she could provide. But was a spark enough to build a life on? Could she really throw away the security and stability Joseph offered for the unknown path Zachary represented? As she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Hazel realized she had a decision to make, perhaps the most important decision of her life. The days leading up to Friday passed in a blur of wedding preparations and increasingly uncomfortable encounters with Joseph and his children. Martha had taken to ignoring Hazel completely, while the boys followed their sister's lead, responding to Hazel's attempts at conversation with sullen monosyllables. Joseph himself seemed oblivious to the tension, already treating Hazel as if she were his wife, making decisions for her and speaking for her in conversations. When she tried to express an opinion about the wedding arrangements, he patted her hand condescendingly and said, "Leave these matters to those with experience, my dear." By Friday morning, Hazel felt as if she were suffocating under the weight of expectations and obligations. The wedding was just 9 days away, and with each passing hour her anxiety grew. "Hazel, are you listening to me?" Her mother's voice cut through her thoughts. They were in the kitchen, preparing lunch, though Hazel had been stirring the same pot of soup for far too long. "I'm sorry, Mother." "What did you say?" Margaret sighed in exasperation. "I said we need to go to Mrs. Fletcher's this afternoon for your final dress fitting, and then we're meeting with Reverend Thomas to discuss the ceremony details." "Actually, Mother," Hazel said, an idea forming, "I promised Mrs. Wilson that I would help her with some mending this afternoon. Her arthritis has been troubling her lately." It was a lie, but not an implausible one. Hazel often helped the elderly widow with various tasks. Margaret frowned. "Can't it wait? The wedding is so soon and there's still so much to do." "I promised," Hazel insisted. "And it won't take long. I can meet you at Mrs. Fletcher's afterward." Her mother hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. "Very well, but don't be too long. Mrs. Fletcher has other appointments today." Hazel felt a twinge of guilt for the deception, but it was overshadowed by the fluttering anticipation in her stomach at the thought of seeing Zachary again. After lunch, Hazel changed into her second-best dress, a pale yellow that brought out the auburn highlights in her hair, and told her mother she was heading to Mrs. Wilson's. Instead, she made her way to the Silverton Hotel, a modest establishment on the edge of town that catered primarily to travelers and cowboys passing through. She hesitated outside, suddenly aware of how improper it was for an unmarried woman to be visiting a man at a hotel. If anyone saw her and word got back to her parents, or, worse, to Joseph, the scandal would be significant. But the need to see Zachary, to hear what he had to say, outweighed her concerns about propriety. Taking a deep breath, she entered the hotel and approached the front desk. The clerk, a bored-looking young man, glanced up at her approach. "Can I help you, miss?" "I'm looking for Mr. Zachary Reeves," Hazel said, keeping her voice low. "I believe he's staying here." The clerk raised an eyebrow but didn't comment on her presence. "Room 203, upstairs to the right." "Thank you," Hazel said, her heart pounding as she climbed the stairs. Outside room 203, she paused, gathering her courage before knocking softly on the door. It opened almost immediately, revealing Zachary, who looked both surprised and pleased to see her. "Hazel," he said, stepping back to let her in. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "Neither was I," she admitted, entering the small room. It was simply furnished with a bed, a chair, and a small table, but it was clean and well kept. "Please, sit down," Zachary said, gesturing to the chair while he sat on the edge of the bed. Hazel perched on the chair, suddenly nervous now that she was here. "I can't stay long," she said. "My mother thinks I'm helping Mrs. Wilson with her mending." Zachary nodded in understanding. "I appreciate you coming at all. It means a lot." There was a moment of awkward silence, neither quite sure how to begin. "I've been thinking about what you said," Hazel finally ventured. "About having a choice." "And?" Zachary prompted gently. "I don't love Joseph," Hazel said, the words tumbling out now that she had started. "I don't think I ever could, but my parents have arranged everything and they're so set on this match. My mother says it's final." Zachary leaned forward, his blue eyes intense. "Not if you say no," he said firmly. "No one can force you to marry against your will." "But the consequences would be difficult," Zachary acknowledged. "I won't pretend otherwise. There would be gossip, disappointment, maybe even anger. But would those temporary hardships be worse than a lifetime of unhappiness?" Put that way, the answer seemed clear. But Hazel had been raised to prioritize duty and family expectations over personal happiness. The idea of defying her parents, of causing them pain and embarrassment, was almost unthinkable. "I barely know you," she said, voicing another concern. "How can I be sure that life with you would be any better?" Zachary ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she was beginning to recognize as a sign of his thoughtfulness. "You can't be sure," he admitted. "I can tell you that I would respect you, that I would listen to you, that I would try every day to make you happy. But those are just words until they're proven by actions." He rose from the bed and knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. "I'm not asking you to run away with me right now, Hazel. I'm asking you to give us a chance to know each other better before you commit to a life with a man you don't love." The sincerity in his eyes, the warmth of his hands around hers, made Hazel's resolve waver. There was something between them, a connection she couldn't deny or explain. "How?" she asked. "The wedding is in 9 days. Even if I wanted to delay it, Joseph would never agree." "Then don't delay it," Zachary said. "Cancel it." The boldness of his suggestion took her breath away. "I can't just—" "You can," Zachary insisted. "It's your life, Hazel. You have the right to choose how you live it and who you share it with." A knock at the door interrupted them, and Zachary quickly stood, moving away from Hazel as the door opened to reveal the hotel clerk. "Mr. Reeves," the clerk said, looking between them with barely concealed curiosity. "There's a telegram for you from the R. "Thank you," Zachary said, taking the telegram and slipping the clerk a coin. After the door closed, Zachary opened the telegram, his expression growing serious as he read it. "Is everything all right?" Hazel asked. "There's trouble at the ranch," Zachary said, folding the telegram and putting it in his pocket. "One of the hands was injured during the roundup and Mr. Randall needs me back sooner than expected." "Oh," Hazel said, trying to hide her disappointment. "When do you have to leave?" "Tonight," Zachary said. "I'm sorry, Hazel. I wanted more time to talk with you." "It's all right," she said, standing. "I should be going anyway. My mother will be wondering where I am." Zachary took her hands again. "Think about what I said, please, and know that whatever you decide, I'll understand." Hazel nodded, her throat tight with emotion. "When will you be back in town?" "I'm not sure," Zachary admitted. "The roundup could take another week or more. But I'll try to get back before—" He stopped, not wanting to say the words. "Before the wedding," Hazel finished for him. "Yes," Zachary said. But if I can't, and if you decide you want something different for your life, send word to the Triple R. I'll come for you no matter what." The intensity of his promise, the depth of feeling in his eyes made Hazel's heart race. On impulse, she leaned forward and pressed a quick, soft kiss to his cheek. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing me when no one else does." With that, she turned and hurried from the room, her cheeks flushed and her mind whirling with possibilities she had never dared to consider before. The days that followed were among the most difficult of Hazel's life. Every hour brought her closer to the wedding, closer to a future she increasingly dreaded. Joseph visited daily, his proprietary attitude growing more pronounced as the wedding approached. He spoke of our home and our future as if Hazel's consent was a mere formality, a box to be checked rather than a genuine choice. Her mother noticed her distraction and attributed it to pre-wedding nerves. "Every bride feels this way," she assured Hazel. "It will pass once you're settled into your new life." But Hazel knew it wasn't just nerves. It was a growing certainty that she was making a terrible mistake, that she was allowing herself to be pushed into a life that would slowly extinguish the light within her. She thought constantly of Zachary, of the connection they had shared in those brief encounters. Was it possible to feel so strongly about someone she barely knew? Or was she simply grasping at any alternative to the future that had been arranged for her? 3 days before the wedding, Joseph invited Hazel and her parents to dinner at his home. It was meant to be a celebration, a chance for Hazel to become more comfortable in what would soon be her new home. The Blackwood house was large and well-appointed, reflecting Joseph's wealth and status in the community. But to Hazel, it felt cold and impersonal, with none of the warmth and character that made a house a home. During dinner, Joseph dominated the conversation, discussing his business interests with Hazel's father while her mother fussed over the children. Hazel sat quietly, pushing food around her plate without really eating. "Hazel will take charge of the household accounts once we're married," Joseph announced, as if she weren't sitting right there. "Though I'll oversee the larger expenditures, of course. A woman's understanding of financial matters is necessarily limited." Hazel's father nodded in agreement, while her mother smiled approvingly. No one seemed to notice or care that Joseph had just dismissed Hazel's intelligence and capability with a single sentence. "Actually," Hazel said, surprising herself with her boldness, "I've always had a good head for numbers. My father taught me to balance his ledgers when I was just 12. Joseph looked at her with surprise, as if he'd forgotten she could speak for herself. "Did he now? Well, that's charming, my dear, but I assure you that my business affairs are far more complex than a small-town merchant's ledgers." "I'm sure they are," Hazel agreed, keeping her voice level despite the anger bubbling within her. "But I'm a quick learner, and I believe that a wife should be a true partner to her husband, not just a decorative addition to his household." A tense silence fell over the table. Joseph looked nonplussed, clearly not used to being challenged, especially by a woman. Hazel's mother shot her a warning look, while her father cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Well," Joseph said finally, his tone condescending, "we'll see how you feel after you've settled into your role as mistress of this house and mother to my children. I suspect you'll find those duties quite sufficient to occupy your time and energy." The dismissal was clear, and Hazel felt a fresh wave of despair wash over her. This was to be her life, her opinions disregarded, her abilities underestimated, her worth measured only by how well she performed the duties assigned to her. After dinner, while her parents and Joseph retired to the parlor, Hazel took the opportunity to explore the house that would soon be her prison. She wandered through the formal dining room, the study with its imposing desk and shelves of leather-bound books, the bedrooms upstairs where Joseph's children slept. Finally, she came to the master bedroom, Joseph's room, which would soon be hers as well. It was large and well furnished, with a massive four-poster bed dominating the space. Hazel stood in the doorway, unable to make herself cross the threshold. The thought of sharing that bed with Joseph, of surrendering her body to a man she didn't love, made her physically ill. "It's not so bad," a voice said behind her, and Hazel turned to find Martha standing there, watching her with those cold, assessing eyes. "Pardon me," Hazel said, startled by the girl's sudden appearance. "Being his wife," Martha clarified. "My mother said it wasn't so bad. He leaves you alone most of the time, as long as you do what he expects." There was something in the girl's tone, a bitterness beyond her years, that broke Hazel's heart. "Your mother told you that," Martha nodded, "before she died. She said I should remember that when it's my turn to marry." The resignation in the child's voice, the acceptance of a future where the best she could hope for was to be left alone by her husband, crystallized something in Hazel's mind. This was the legacy she would be perpetuating if she married Joseph, not just for herself, but for Martha, and for any daughters she might have in the future. "It shouldn't be that way," Hazel said softly. "Marriage should be a partnership based on mutual respect and, ideally, love." Martha scoffed, sounding far older than her 12 years. "That's from your novels, isn't it? That's not real life." "It can be," Hazel insisted. "It should be." "If you say so," Martha replied skeptically. "But Papa's already planning to send me to finishing school next year to prepare me for making a good match, just like he did with my mother." The parallels were too stark to ignore. Joseph's first wife, trapped in a loveless marriage, had passed on her resignation and low expectations to her daughter. And now, Joseph expected to do the same with Hazel, to mold her into a proper wife who knew her place and didn't challenge his authority. In that moment, standing in the doorway of what would be her marital bedroom, listening to a child who had already been taught to expect so little from life, Hazel made her decision. She would not marry Joseph Blackwood. She would not perpetuate this cycle of unhappiness and resigned acceptance. She would find the courage to say no, to choose a different path, even if it meant facing the disapproval of her parents and the gossip of the town. And maybe, just maybe, that path would lead her to Zachary Reeves, a man who saw her as an equal, who valued her thoughts and feelings, who made her feel alive in a way Joseph never could. The next morning, Hazel woke with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in weeks. She dressed carefully in her favorite blue dress, the one Zachary had first seen her in, and went downstairs to find her parents already at breakfast. "You're up early," her mother commented, "and looking very nice. Are you meeting Joseph today?" "No," Hazel said, taking a deep breath to steady herself. "Actually, I need to talk to both of you about something important." Her parents exchanged glances, her father setting down his newspaper with a frown. "What is it, Hazel?" he asked. "Is something wrong?" "Yes," Hazel said simply. "I can't marry Joseph Blackwood." There was a moment of stunned silence, then her mother's teacup clattered against its saucer as she set it down too forcefully. "What do you mean, you can't marry him?" Margaret demanded. "The wedding is in 2 days. Everything is arranged." "I know," Hazel said, forcing herself to remain calm in the face of her mother's growing agitation. "And I'm sorry for the inconvenience and embarrassment this will cause. But I cannot marry a man I don't love, who doesn't respect me, and who sees me as nothing more than a convenient solution to his need for a mother for his children." Her father's face had grown red with anger. "This is nonsense, Hazel. Joseph Blackwood is one of the most respected men in the territory. He can provide for you in ways few other men can. And he's chosen you despite the fact that there are many young women who would be honored to be his wife. "Then let one of them marry him," Hazel replied, surprising herself with her firmness. "I won't do it." "You most certainly will," her mother said, rising from her chair. "This is just pre-wedding nerves, as I've been telling you. You'll feel differently once you're married and settled." "No, Mother," Hazel said, standing her ground. "I won't feel differently. I'll just be trapped in a marriage I never wanted with a man I can never love." "Love," her mother scoffed. "Love is a luxury, Hazel, not a necessity. What will you do without Joseph's protection and provision?" "How will you live?" "I'll find work," Hazel said. "I'm good with numbers, as Father knows. I could keep books for a business or teach, or no respectable establishment would hire you after you've jilted Joseph Blackwood at the altar," her father interrupted. "You'd be ruined in this town." "Then I'll go to another town," Hazel said, though the prospect terrified her. "Or I'll find another way, but I won't marry Joseph." Her mother's face hardened. "This is about that cowboy, isn't it? The one from the Triple R, Mrs. Peterson told me she saw you talking to him at the store, and Reverend Thomas mentioned seeing you with him after church." Hazel felt a flush rise to her cheeks, but didn't deny it. "Zachary Reeves is a good man who treats me with respect. He sees me as a person, not as a possession." "He's a nobody," her mother exclaimed. "A drifter who probably won't stay in one place long enough to put down roots, let alone provide a stable home for a family." "He's been at the Triple R for 3 years," Hazel pointed out. "That hardly makes him a drifter. And he may not be wealthy, but he's honest and hardworking." "This is ridiculous," her father declared, standing up. "I won't hear any more of this foolishness. You will marry Joseph Blackwood as arranged, and that's final." Hazel took a deep breath, gathering her courage for what she knew would be the most difficult words she had ever spoken. "No, Father, it's not final. Not if I say no." The silence that followed was deafening. Her parents stared at her as if she had suddenly started speaking a foreign language. "What did you say?" her father asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "I said no," Hazel repeated, her voice stronger now. "I won't marry Joseph. I've made my decision, and I'll face whatever consequences come from it." Her mother sank back into her chair, a hand pressed to her heart as if Hazel's words had physically wounded her. "You would bring this shame upon our family. After everything we've done for you." The guilt was almost unbearable, but Hazel stood firm. "I'm sorry for the pain this will cause you." "Truly, I am. But I can't sacrifice my entire future to spare you temporary embarrassment." "Get out," her father said, his voice cold with anger. "If you're determined to defy us and ruin yourself, you can do it under someone else's roof. You're no longer welcome in this house." Though she had expected anger, the finality of her father's rejection hit Hazel like a physical blow. "Father, please out," he thundered. "Pack your things and be gone by noon. And don't expect any help from us when your cowboy abandons you, as men of his sort inevitably do." Tears filled Hazel's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. With as much dignity as she could muster, she turned and went upstairs to pack her meager belongings. An hour later, Hazel stood on the porch of her childhood home, a small carpet bag containing her clothes and a few precious books at her feet. Her mother had not come to say goodbye, but she had slipped a small pouch of coins into Hazel's bag when her father wasn't looking, a silent acknowledgement. Perhaps that while she couldn't support Hazel's decision, she couldn't completely abandon her daughter either. Hazel had no idea where to go. She had friends in town, but none who would be willing to defy public opinion by taking her in after she had jilted Joseph Blackwood. She could try to find work, but as her father had pointed out, her prospects in Willow Creek were grim once word of her broken engagement spread. There was only one place she could think to go, one person who had offered her a different path. Zachary had said to send word to the Triple R if she decided she wanted something different for her life. Well, she had made that decision, and now she needed him to make good on his promise. With her head held high, ignoring the curious glances of neighbors who had noticed her standing on the porch with her bag, Hazel set off toward the livery stable at the edge of town. She would need a horse if she was going to reach the Triple R, which was a good half-day's ride from Willow Creek. At the stable, the owner, Mr. Jenkins, looked at her with surprise when she asked to rent a horse. "On your own, Miss Thornton?" he asked, his bushy eyebrows rising. "That's not usual, especially this close to your wedding." "There's been a change of plans," Hazel said, keeping her voice steady. "I need to travel to the Triple R ranch. Can you rent me a gentle horse? I'm not an experienced rider." Mr. Jenkins scratched his beard thoughtfully. "I could, but I don't like the idea of a young woman riding out alone. The road can be dangerous, especially for someone not used to handling a horse in rough terrain." Hazel's heart sank. She hadn't considered that she might not be able to secure transportation. "Please, Mr. Jenkins, it's very important that I reach the Triple R today. May I ask why?" A familiar voice said from behind her, and Hazel turned to find Joseph Blackwood standing in the stable doorway, his expression thunderous. "Joseph," Hazel said, her mouth suddenly dry. "I was going to come speak with you, were you?" Joseph interrupted, stepping closer. "Because it looks to me like you were planning to run away without so much as a word of explanation. Your father came to see me this morning, very upset. He told me about your foolish notions." Mr. Jenkins, sensing the tension, mumbled something about checking on a horse in the back and quickly made himself scarce. "I'm sorry, Joseph," Hazel said, genuinely regretful for the pain she was causing, even if she knew her decision was right. "I should have spoken to you directly. But my feelings haven't changed. I can't marry you." Joseph's face darkened with anger. "This is about that Cowboy Reeves. Your father told me about him too. Do you really think a man like that will make you happy? That he'll be faithful to you? Men like him take what they want and move on." "You don't know him," Hazel said, bristling at his characterization of Zachary. "And you do," Joseph countered. "How long have you known him? A week, 2. And you're willing to throw away everything, your reputation, your family, your future security for a man you barely know." Put that way, it did sound foolish. But Hazel knew in her heart that marrying Joseph would be an even greater mistake. "I'm not doing this because of Zachary," she said, though that wasn't entirely true. "I'm doing it because I know I can't be happy as your wife. We want different things, Joseph. You want a woman who will fit neatly into the role you've defined for her, who won't challenge you or have opinions of her own. That's not me, and it never will be." Joseph stared at her for a long moment, his expression shifting from anger to something colder, more calculating. "You think you know what you want," he said finally. "But you're young and naive. The world is a harsh place for a woman alone, Hazel. Without a husband's protection, without family support, what do you think will happen to you?" "I'll manage," Hazel said, though uncertainty gnawed at her. "I'm stronger than you think." Joseph shook his head, as if dealing with a particularly stubborn child. "This isn't about strength. It's about reality. No respectable establishment will hire you after you've broken our engagement. No decent family will take you in. You'll be ostracized, cut off from society." "Then I'll go somewhere else," Hazel insisted. "Somewhere I can start fresh." "With Reeves?" Joseph scoffed. "Do you really think he wants the burden of a wife? Men like him value their freedom above all else. He might have filled your head with pretty words, but when it comes to making a real commitment, he'll disappear faster than morning dew in the summer sun." The doubt that Joseph was trying to plant found fertile ground in Hazel's mind. What if he was right? What if Zachary had simply been flirting with her? with no intention of following through on his promises. What if, after turning her back on everything familiar and secure, she found herself truly alone? But then she remembered the look in Zachary's eyes when he had knelt before her in that hotel room, the sincerity in his voice when he had promised to come for her, if she decided she wanted something different for her life. That hadn't been the behavior of a man looking for a casual dalliance. "I'm willing to take that risk," Hazel said, her resolve strengthening. "Better that than a lifetime of unhappiness with you." The bluntness of her words clearly shocked Joseph, whose face flushed with anger and humiliation. "You'll regret this decision," he said, his voice low and threatening. "I would have given you everything: security, status, a place in society. Now you'll have nothing." "I'll have my freedom," Hazel countered, "and that's worth more to me than anything you could offer." With that, she turned away from him and walked out of the stable, her head held high despite the fear and uncertainty churning within her. She had burned her bridges now with her family, with Joseph, with the society she had grown up in. There was no going back, only forward, toward whatever future awaited her at the R Ranch. But first, she needed to find a way to get there. As Hazel stood on the street, considering her options, a wagon rolled up beside her, driven by a familiar figure, Mrs. Wilson, the elderly widow she had claimed to be helping when she had gone to meet Zachary at the hotel. "Hazel, dear," Mrs. Wilson called, her weathered face creased with concern. "I heard there was some trouble at your house this morning. Are you all right?" News traveled fast in a small town like Willow Creek. Hazel was surprised the entire population didn't already know of her disgrace. "I'm fine, Mrs. Wilson," Hazel said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "There's been a change of plans regarding the wedding, Mrs. Wilson's sharp eyes took in Hazel's carpetbag and the determined set of her jaw. "So I heard," she said. "And now you're heading somewhere." Hazel hesitated, unsure how much to reveal. Mrs. Wilson had always been kind to her, but would that kindness extend to helping a young woman who had broken her engagement and defied her parents? "I need to get to the R Ranch," Hazel said finally, deciding that honesty was her best option. "Do you know if anyone is heading that way today?" Mrs. Wilson's eyebrows rose, but she didn't comment on Hazel's destination. "As it happens, I'm going part of the way myself. My nephew has a farm about 5 miles down the road to the R. I could take you that far at least." Relief washed over Hazel. 5 miles was much better than the full 15 or so to the ranch. "That would be wonderful, Mrs. Wilson. Thank you." The older woman patted the seat beside her. "Climb up then, and you can tell me all about this change of plans on the way." As they left Willow Creek behind, Hazel felt a weight lifting from her shoulders with each mile that passed. She told Mrs. Wilson everything about her parents' insistence on the marriage, about Joseph's controlling nature, about her meeting with Zachary and his promise to respect her choices. To Hazel's surprise, Mrs. Wilson didn't seem shocked or disapproving. "I married for love," the older woman said, a wistful smile crossing her face. "My Harold wasn't wealthy or particularly well connected, but he was kind and he treated me as an equal. We had 42 good years together before he passed." "That's what I want," Hazel said. "Not just a husband, but a partner, someone who sees me for who I am, not for what I can do for him." Mrs. Wilson nodded in understanding. "And you think this cowboy of yours, this Zachary, might be that person?" "I don't know," Hazel admitted. "I barely know him, but I feel something when I'm with him that I've never felt with anyone else. And right now, he's the only person who's offered me a way out of a future I couldn't bear." "That's a start," Mrs. Wilson said pragmatically. "But be careful, Hazel. The heart can play tricks on us, especially when we're young and facing difficult choices." "I will be," Hazel promised. "I'm not expecting some fairy tale ending. I just want a chance to find my own path, to make my own decisions about my life." Mrs. Wilson reached over and patted Hazel's hand. "Then I wish you all the best, my dear. And if things don't work out at the Triple R, my door is always open to you." The simple kindness of that offer brought tears to Hazel's eyes. "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson. You don't know how much that means to me." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the rhythmic clip-clop of the horses' hooves and the creaking of the wagon wheels the only sounds. The landscape changed as they left the town behind, with rolling hills giving way to more rugged terrain, dotted with scrubby pines and the occasional cluster of wildflowers. As promised, Mrs. Wilson dropped Hazel at her nephew's farm, a modest homestead with fields of corn and wheat stretching toward the horizon. After extracting another promise from Hazel to come to her if things didn't work out, the older woman continued on her way, leaving Hazel to face the final leg of her journey alone. The road to the Triple R was well traveled, at least, a dirt path wide enough for wagons that wound through the increasingly hilly landscape. Hazel walked steadily, her carpetbag growing heavier with each step, but her determination never faltering. The sun was high in the sky when she crested a hill and saw the Triple R spread out before her, a sprawling ranch with a large main house, several outbuildings, corrals filled with horses, and pastures where cattle grazed in the distance. It was an impressive operation, larger than she had imagined. As she approached the main gate, a man on horseback rode out to meet her, his hand resting casually on the gun at his hip. "Can I help you, miss?" he asked, his tone polite but wary. "I'm looking for Zachary Reeves," Hazel said, suddenly aware of how she must look a young woman alone, dusty from the road, carrying a carpet-bag. "Is he here?" The cowboy's expression shifted from wariness to curiosity. "Zach? Yeah, he's here, working with the new horses in the South Corral." "You a friend of his?" "Yes," Hazel said, relief flooding through her. "Could you tell me how to find him?" The cowboy considered her for a moment, then nodded. "Follow the main path past the house, then take the left fork toward the corrals. You can't miss him. He's the one trying to break that big bay stallion that nobody else will touch." "Thank you," Hazel said, setting off in the direction he had indicated. The ranch was bustling with activity, cowboys moving between tasks, a cook shouting orders from the door of what must be the bunkhouse, horses whinnying and cattle lowing in the distance. No one paid much attention to Hazel as she made her way past the main house, which was grander than she had expected, with a wide porch wrapping around it and smoke curling from two chimneys. Following the cowboy's directions, she took the left fork and soon came within sight of the corrals. In the nearest one, a man was indeed working with a large bay stallion, the horse circling nervously as the man stood calmly in the center, speaking to it in a low, steady voice. Even from a distance, Hazel recognized Zachary. There was something about the way he held himself, confident yet gentle, that was unmistakable. Her heart began to race as she approached, a mixture of anxiety and anticipation making her palms sweat. She stopped at the corral fence, not wanting to disturb Zachary while he was working with the horse. The stallion was magnificent, with powerful muscles rippling beneath its glossy coat, but there was a wildness in its eyes that spoke of a spirit not yet broken, or perhaps, given Zachary's methods, not meant to be broken at all. Zachary hadn't noticed her yet, his attention fully on the horse. "That's it," she heard him say, his voice carrying on the breeze. "You're doing fine. Nobody's going to hurt you here." The gentleness in his tone, the patience with which he worked, confirmed everything Hazel had sensed about him. This was a man who understood that true strength came not from domination but from partnership, from mutual respect and trust. Finally, the stallion seemed to relax slightly, lowering its head and blowing out a breath. Zachary approached it slowly, hand outstretched, and after a moment's hesitation the horse allowed him to touch its neck, a brief contact that represented a significant victory. "Good boy," Zachary said, stepping back to give the horse space. "That's enough for today." It was only as he turned to leave the corral that he spotted Hazel standing at the fence. He froze, disbelief and then joy washing over his face. "Hazel," he said, as if he couldn't quite trust his eyes. "Is that really you?" Hazel nodded, suddenly shy now that she was actually here. "Hello, Zachary." In a few long strides he was at the fence, his eyes searching her face. "What are you doing here?" "The wedding? There isn't going to be a wedding," Hazel said. "At least not to Joseph Blackwood." A slow smile spread across Zachary's face, lighting up his blue eyes. "You said no." "I said no," Hazel confirmed, a matching smile tugging at her lips despite the uncertainty of her situation. "And now I'm here taking you up on your offer of a different path." Zachary reached across the fence and took her hand in his touch sending a now familiar warmth through her. "I'm glad," he said simply. "More glad than I can say." For a moment they just stood there, hands linked across the corral fence, smiling at each other like fools. Then Zachary seemed to remember himself and released her hand to unlatch the gate. "Come on," he said, gesturing for her to follow him. "Let's get you settled. You must be tired after your journey." As they walked back toward the main house, Zachary full of questions about how she had gotten to the ranch and what had happened with her family and Joseph. A tall, distinguished-looking man in his 50s emerged from the house and strode toward them. "That's Mr. Randall," Zachary murmured to Hazel, "the owner of the Triple R. He's a good man, fair and honest." Roger Randall looked between Zachary and Hazel with undisguised curiosity. "Reeves," he said by way of greeting. "Who's your friend, Mr. Randall?" "This is Miss Hazel Thornton," Zachary said, a note of pride in his voice. "Hazel, this is my boss, Roger Randall." "Miss Thornton," Randall said, tipping his hat politely. "Welcome to the Triple R." "Thank you, sir," Hazel replied, suddenly very aware of her dusty appearance and the implications of her presence at the ranch. "Miss Thornton needs a place to stay," Zachary explained. "She's had some trouble in town." Randall's sharp eyes assessed Hazel, but there was no judgment in his gaze. "I see. Well, we have a spare room in the main house that my housekeeper, Mrs. Hayes, uses for guests. I'm sure she'd be happy to show you to it." Hazel felt a rush of gratitude for this unexpected kindness. "That's very generous of you, Mr. Randall." "I don't want to impose nonsense," Randall interrupted with a wave of his hand. "Any friend of Reeves is welcome here. He's one of my best hands and I trust his judgment." The simple statement, delivered matter-of-factly, seemed to please Zachary immensely. "Thank you, sir," he said. "I appreciate that." "Don't mention it," Randall replied. "Now I imagine you two have some talking to do. Reeves, you can have the rest of the afternoon off. The bay can wait until tomorrow." With that, he turned and strode back toward the house, leaving Hazel and Zachary alone once more. "He seems nice," Hazel said, still a bit overwhelmed by the warm reception. "He is," Zachary confirmed. "One of the best men I've ever worked for. Treats his hands like people, not just hired help. And he's fair, pays well, provides good food and lodging, doesn't hold a man's past against him." There was something in his tone when he mentioned a man's past that made Hazel curious, but now didn't seem the time to pry. Instead, she followed Zachary to the main house, where they were met by Mrs. Hayes, a motherly woman in her 60s who fussed over Hazel as if she were a long-lost relative. "You poor dear, you look exhausted," Mrs. Hayes said, ushering Hazel inside. "Let me show you to your room. You can wash up and rest and then join us for dinner if you're feeling up to it." The room was small but comfortable, with a single bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a window that overlooked the mountains in the distance. After Mrs. Hayes left, promising to bring hot water for washing, Zachary lingered in the doorway. "I still can't believe you're here," he said, his voice soft with wonder. "When I got that telegram calling me back to the ranch, I was afraid I wouldn't see you again before the wedding. I thought about riding into town, consequences be damned, but the boss needed me here." "I'm glad you didn't," Hazel said. "It would have made things even more complicated, and I needed to make this decision for myself, not because you persuaded me." Zachary nodded in understanding. "And now, are you sure this is what you want?" Hazel thought about everything she had left behind: her parents, her home, the security of a predictable future. But she also thought about what she had gained: the freedom to choose her own path, the chance to discover who she truly was apart from others' expectations. "I'm sure," she said firmly. "I don't know exactly what the future holds, but I know I couldn't have married Joseph. It would have been a lie for both of us." "And us?" Zachary asked, his voice careful, as if he was afraid of presuming too much. "What do you want from me, Hazel?" It was a fair question. After all, she had come to the Triple R specifically looking for him, putting her trust in a man she had met only a handful of times. "Time," Hazel said honestly. "Time to get to know you better, to see if this connection between us is real or just a convenient escape from Joseph." "I'm not asking for promises or commitments, Zachary, just a chance to find out what might be possible." Relief and something like admiration flooded Zachary's face. "That seems fair," he said, "and wise. We have time now, Hazel, all the time we need." With that, he stepped back, giving her the space she needed. "Rest," he said. "I'll see you at dinner if you're feeling up to it." After he left, Hazel sat on the edge of the bed, the events of the day catching up with her. She had done it, defied her parents, broken her engagement, left behind everything familiar to pursue a future that was uncertain at best. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. But as she looked out the window at the mountains in the distance, Hazel felt a sense of peace settle over her. For the first time in her life, she had made a choice based on what she truly wanted, not what others expected of her. Whatever happened next, she would face it on her own terms, with her head held high and her heart open to possibilities she had never dared to imagine before. The next few weeks at the Triple R were a revelation for Hazel. Free from the constraints of her parents' expectations and Joseph's possessive attention, she found herself blossoming like a flower that had finally found sunlight after too long in the shade. Mrs. Hayes, the housekeeper, took Hazel under her wing, teaching her the routines of the ranch and introducing her to the various hands and their families. To Hazel's surprise and relief, no one seemed to judge her for her broken engagement or her unconventional arrival at the ranch. Here, far from the gossiping tongues of Willow Creek, she was simply Miss Hazel, a young woman who helped Mrs. Hayes with the cooking and mending and who was clearly sweet on Zachary Reeves, and she was sweet on him. As the days passed, Hazel and Zachary spent every spare moment together, getting to know each other in a way that hadn't been possible during their brief, clandestine meetings in town. They went riding together, Zachary patiently teaching Hazel to handle a horse with confidence. They walked along the creek that ran through the property, talking about their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. In the evenings, they sat on the porch of the main house, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple. Zachary, it turned out, had grown up in Missouri, the son of a blacksmith. He had left home at 16 after his father's death, working his way west through a series of jobs on ranches and farms. He was honest about his past, including a brief period when he had fallen in with a rough crowd and done things he wasn't proud of. "Mr. Randall gave me a second chance when not many would," he told Hazel one evening as they sat by the creek. "Taught me that a man's worth isn't determined by his worst mistakes, but by how he chooses to live each day going forward." Hazel found herself falling for this man who spoke so openly about his flaws and his efforts to be better, who treated her with a respect and consideration she had never experienced with Joseph. Zachary listened when she spoke, valued her opinions, encouraged her to think for herself. He didn't try to mold her into some idealized version of womanhood, but accepted her as she was: intelligent, curious, sometimes stubborn, but always honest. For his part, Zachary made no secret of his feelings for Hazel. "I think I started falling for you the moment I saw you at that window," he confessed one day as they rode across a high meadow filled with wildflowers. "You looked so beautiful and so sad, like a bird in a cage. All I wanted was to set you free." "And now?" Hazel asked, her heart racing at his words. Zachary reined his horse to a stop and turned to face her. "Now I want to build a life with you," he said simply. "Not a cage, never that, but a home where we can both be free to be who we truly are together." It was the most romantic thing anyone had ever said to her, all the more powerful for its sincerity. Hazel felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sadness. "I'd like that," she whispered. "Very much." Zachary's smile lit up his entire face, and he leaned across the space between their horses to kiss her their first kiss, sweet and gentle and full of promise. As summer turned to fall, Hazel found herself settling into life at the Triple R with surprising ease. She had written to Mrs. Wilson to let her know she was safe and happy, and the older woman had replied with a warm letter that included news from town. Joseph Blackwood had already begun courting a widow from the next town over, and Hazel's parents were telling everyone that she had gone to stay with relatives in Denver for her health. The letter had brought a pang of sadness. Hazel missed her parents, despite their differences, and she hoped that someday they might reconcile. But she had no regrets about the choice she had made. Here at the Triple R, she had found not just love with Zachary, but a sense of purpose and belonging she had never experienced in Willow Creek. Mr. Randall, impressed by her head for numbers, had asked her to help with the ranch's accounts, a task she took to with enthusiasm. Mrs. Hayes declared her the best baker she'd seen in years, and put her in charge of the bread and desserts for the ranch's meals. And the Hands children, who often visited the main house, adored Miss Hazel and her stories and games. One crisp October evening, as Hazel and Zachary sat on their favorite spot by the creek, watching the leaves drift down from the trees and listening to the water gurgle over the rocks, Zachary took her hand in his. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice uncharacteristically nervous. "About the future, our future." Hazel's heart skipped a beat. "Oh, and what have you been thinking?" Zachary took a deep breath. "Mr. Randall offered me a promotion yesterday, foreman of the entire ranch. It comes with a raise and a small house of my own just over that rise." He pointed to a hill not far from the main house. "Zachary, that's wonderful," Hazel exclaimed. "You deserve it. You work harder than anyone here." "The thing is," Zachary continued, his blue eyes intent on hers, "that house would be awful empty with just me in it, and I was hoping—" "Well, I was hoping you might consider sharing it with me, as my wife." Though they had spoken of building a life together, this was the first time Zachary had actually proposed marriage. Hazel felt a momentary flutter of fear, memories of her near marriage to Joseph still fresh, but it was quickly replaced by a surge of joy and certainty. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and confident. "Yes, I would love to be your wife, Zachary Reeves." The smile that broke across Zachary's face was like the sun coming out after a storm. He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal a simple but beautiful ring, a small sapphire set in silver. "It's not fancy," he said apologetically, as he slipped it onto her finger. "Not like what Blackwood could have given you." But Hazel silenced him with a kiss. "It's perfect," she said when they finally broke apart. "And so are you. Not perfect in the sense of being without flaws, we both have those, but perfect for me. The perfect partner for the life I want to build." Zachary pulled her close, his arms strong and secure around her. "I promise to honor that trust," he said softly against her hair. "Every day, for as long as we both shall live." As they walked back to the ranch house hand in hand, the setting sun casting long shadows ahead of them, Hazel thought about the journey that had brought her here from a future that had been decided for her to one she had chosen for herself. Her mother had told her that her marriage to Joseph was final, but Hazel had found the courage to say no, to forge her own path. And that path had led her to Zachary, to the Triple R, to a life filled with love and respect and endless possibilities. It wasn't the secure, predictable future her parents had envisioned for her, but it was rich and real and hers. Zachary squeezed her hand, as if reading her thoughts. "No regrets?" he asked. Hazel looked up at him, at the man who had seen her when no one else did, who had offered her a choice when everyone else had tried to deny her one. "None," she said with absolute certainty. "Not a single one." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with Mr. Randall giving Hazel away and Mrs. Hayes weeping happily in the front row. The Hands and their families attended, along with Mrs. Wilson, who had made the journey from Willow Creek especially for the occasion. To Hazel's surprise and delight, her mother also came, arriving the day before the wedding with a trunk full of linens and household items she had been collecting for Hazel's trousseau. "I don't approve of how you went about this," Margaret Thornton said stiffly when she and Hazel were alone. "Running away like that, embarrassing your father and me in front of the whole town. It wasn't proper." "I know, Mother," Hazel said, bracing herself for more criticism. "And I'm sorry for the pain I caused you, but I couldn't see another way." Margaret sighed, her expression softening slightly. "Your father is still too angry to come," she said. "But I couldn't miss my only daughter's wedding, even if it's not to the man we chose for you." She looked around the small house that Zachary and Hazel would share after their marriage, taking in the simple but comfortable furnishings. "It's not what I wanted for you," she admitted. "But Mrs. Wilson tells me your young man is well respected here, that he works hard and treats you well." "He does," Hazel said, warmth filling her voice. "He sees me, Mother, not as a possession or a convenience, but as a person with thoughts and feelings of my own." Something flickered in Margaret's eyes, understanding, perhaps, or maybe regret for her own marriage, which had never contained that kind of recognition. "Then I suppose that's what matters most," she said quietly. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a start. And when Margaret stood beside Mrs. Wilson the next day, watching as Hazel and Zachary exchanged their vows beneath an arch of autumn leaves, there was a tentative smile on her face. "I, Zachary, take you, Hazel, to be my lawfully wedded wife," Zachary said, his voice strong and sure. "I promise to love and cherish you, to respect and honor you, to walk beside you rather than ahead or behind, all the days of my life." The traditional vows had been modified at Zachary's insistence, reflecting his commitment to a partnership of equals. Hazel felt tears of joy spring to her eyes as she repeated her own vows, promising to love and support Zachary, to respect his strength while offering her own, to build with him a life founded on mutual trust and understanding. As they were pronounced husband and wife, and Zachary kissed her with a tenderness that made the gathered crowd cheer. Hazel knew with absolute certainty that she had made the right choice. Her mother had told her that her marriage to Joseph was final, but Hazel had found the courage to say no, to choose her own path. And that path had led her here, to this moment, to this man who looked at her with love and respect in his eyes, to a future that they would build together, one day at a time. 5 years later, Hazel stood on the porch of their expanded home, watching as Zachary taught their 4-year-old son, Samuel, to ride his first pony. Their 2-year-old daughter, Lily, played at her feet, arranging pebbles in patterns that made sense only to her. The Triple R had prospered under Mr. Randall's ownership and Zachary's management as foreman. They had weathered droughts and harsh winters, fluctuating cattle prices, and the occasional dispute with neighboring ranchers. Through it all, Zachary and Hazel had worked as a team, her sharp mind for business complementing his practical knowledge of ranching. Their home had grown along with their family, a new bedroom added for the children, a larger kitchen where Hazel still baked the bread that the hands declared the best in the territory, a small office where she kept the ranch's books in perfect order, and there had been other changes too. Hazel's father had finally relented and visited last Christmas, gruffly acknowledging that perhaps Zachary wasn't such a bad sort after all. Joseph Blackwood had married his widow and seemed content enough, though Martha, now 17, had recently confided to Hazel during a chance meeting in town that she was determined to marry for love, not convenience. "Like you did," the girl had said, a spark of admiration in her eyes that had warmed Hazel's heart. As Zachary helped Samuel dismount from the pony and led both boy and animal back toward the house, Hazel felt a familiar surge of love and gratitude. This life wasn't perfect. They worked hard, faced challenges, had their share of arguments and reconciliations, but it was rich and real and chosen. "Mama, look," Samuel called, his face alight with pride. "I rode all by myself." "I saw," Hazel called back, smiling at her son's excitement. "You were very brave." "Like Papa," Samuel declared, looking up at Zachary with adoration. "No," Zachary said, ruffling the boy's hair. "Like your mama, she's the bravest person I know." Hazel's eyes met Zachary's over their son's head, a silent communication born of years of loving and working together. In his blue eyes, still as bright and honest as the day they had met, she saw the same admiration and respect that had first drawn her to him. "I love you," she mouthed silently. "And I love you," he mouthed back, his smile as warm and genuine as ever. As they gathered their children and headed inside for supper, Hazel thought once more about the journey that had brought her here. Her mother had told her that her marriage to Joseph was final, but Zachary had shown her that she had a choice, not if she said no. And in saying no to a life that others had chosen for her, she had found the courage to say yes to this one, a life of her own making, shared with a man who saw her, valued her, and loved her for exactly who she was. It wasn't the future her parents had envisioned for her, nor was it the one Joseph had planned. It was better. It was hers. It was theirs. And Hazel wouldn't have changed a single step of the path that had led her home,